Well,
Right. Sure.
all right, KATI RAN. Is that
Hi.
correct?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's it. That's a good effort. Yeah.
Not a bad effort. Right. Well, let's start at the start because most of the people that I speak to, I suppose, are heavy metal acquaintances, people I've sat in backstages with, whether it's dudes, old thrash metal dudes from the 80s, black metal people, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But you've had I mean, doing my bit of homework over the weekend and all that kind of stuff, you've had a pretty different journey to where all of this sort of ends. So maybe just sort of tell me how you managed to be where you are now, and we're going to sort of go through all of the things that you've been lending your vocals to. You're originally Dutch and stuff, right? But
Yeah,
English, right?
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so my origin lies also in my country with attending fantasy and folk festivals. So I come from such a different background probably than maybe other artists that end up doing something with other metal artists or in this scene.
What do you mean
But
fantasy?
yeah, I started out. Sorry?
What do you mean fantasy
What?
festival?
Fantasy? Yeah, exactly. I was just about to tell you. It's we've got festivals in Holland where people dress up like elves, a little bit comparable to the Comic Con that we have in the USA, or goblins or orcs. I think that grew from this whole Lord of the Rings hype that was happening a decade ago,
Sure. Okay.
and people doing role-playing games and D&D and stuff like that. So I come from this very, you could say, fantasy nerdy background, getting acquainted with actually folk music, Celtic music, Slavic music, and there I got to meet people who also work in theater and work with old instruments and also combine that with archaeology. So
Okay.
that, yeah, so my start was in that really kind of niche corner, doing workshops about the history of music through eras, basically starting from sticks and stones to wind instruments to string instruments to what we have today. Yeah, and I just learned some instruments. I was just very interested in them. Really captivated me. So yeah, my origin is, yeah, I would say rooted in that fantasy Celtic kind of expression, and also the sound aspect of that. And I think where I made a little bit of a different route is that I didn't necessarily wanted to play these very traditional tunes that people all know and get together with in a pub, for example. But I wanted to make my own sounds and tunes, and I had this very vivid imagination of combining that with Scandinavian folklore. So it was already like 2008, 2009, where I stuck my nose in the direction of the north, and really loved the type of traditional music that was coming from there, but also these stories about huldre, trolls, mountain giants and things like that. So gradually I moved into Nordic instrumentation.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It,
So pre Viking music hype, you would say.
but it's a whole situation that sort of fascinates me because I mean, okay, if we go all the way back to D&D or something, then I used to play that when I was 11 or 12 years old. But
Yeah,
it was like sitting around listening to Manowar in 1987 or something, or 86 or something like this. But that's neither here nor there really. But it's a sort of a scene that I've find the way into it. Whether it's
mm,
through these metal altar festivals and all these kind of bands. I
exactly.
suppose my first exposure to that would have been maybe 1996, 7, 8, seeing in Extremo or Corvus Corax or something. And because I was
Yeah,
always into goth and stuff, it
yes,
seemed only a
yes,
step from there back to Fields of the Nephilim and Sisters of Mercy on some strange
exactly.
level.
Yeah,
But I was totally alien to whatever you want to call the sort of um, gaming aspect of it. And that's what I find really fascinating about that scene now.
yeah. Yeah, I also had the goth period and everything branching out of that type of music. So I guess you could say it already met with a little bit more darker music. And with the gaming aspect, I when I was 16, I ran through the forest pretending I was a ranger elf, shooting bow and arrows with a group of friends, and we just made up these stories in our minds because we couldn't find our way into the regular discos that were happening for young people.
Sure.
We wanted to really flee into our own type of fantasy world, and I think a lot of these people actually ended up doing something artistic later in life, whether it was becoming an illustrator or doing something with music or working actually in game stores. But yeah, there was this knack for something other than the regular pop music on the radio. So even with doing the role playing games, we already listened to this. Well, I would have to say embarrassingly new agey kind of background music, or yeah, of course we discovered the goth music, the That Can Dance, acts like this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it was a good for me for the type of music I'm doing today. I think it was a good starting point, to
Yeah.
have that.
Yeah, it's sort of as an old metalhead who, I mean, to me, I never gamed really. I was never really interested in things like that. I watched the rise of bands like Heilung and all this kind of stuff with sort of, morbid curiosity, and I'm very interested as to why it sort of became um,
Yeah,
at the end of festivals when it never seemed to
yeah,
pay its, how we say it, pay its dues by
yeah,
working its way to the end of the festivals. And I think that part of what it is, and this is one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was, for me, what it is, it's the over the last 10 years with the growth of social media and all sorts of stuff like this, we've most definitely passed from an aural to a visual world, more
yeah,
so for young people, to me,
yeah,
as somebody who's maybe a bit older or whatever. And so the stuff like Heilung, because it's so optically fascinating. Now, I think
yeah.
personally, when you take away the optics, the music doesn't do much for me personally. But
Well,
I realize that as a person who doesn't associate that music with gaming, for example, I understand completely the sensory immersement in it if you were to apply it to all of these other things such as gaming. But I realize I'm completely kind of left on the shelf, sort of,
yeah,
with trying to understand part of it. You know what I mean? Does that make any sense?
yeah. Oh, it does. Yeah, I think that also has a little bit to do with, well, it has to do with a lot of things. We can try to
Age.
unpack that a little, but maybe age.
Yeah.
uh, it's funny because I actually helped with the first shows for Heilung as management in background because we're just this group of friends, and we didn't expect that to go live, and if we did, that it be a one-time thing. So when you go in it like that, you think, well, let's make something out of it, let's
Sure, of
make it
course.
visually interesting,
Yeah.
let's record it from the get-go because we will maybe never do it again.
Sure, of course.
And these people, my friends, they also have, well, two of them have a background also in role playing as kids in the woods, and also the Viking reenactment markets come in play here. So
Sure.
there is already that aspect of having lived this whole life before it and having done these various forms of expression. And yeah, when it comes to that type of music, there's also, of course, another layer involved, which, for lack of going deep into terminology, I would call it shamanism or the
Sure.
esoterical part.
Yeah, of course.
And
Yeah.
these worlds often have some kind of overlap to it.
Yeah.
Also, ritual. Whether it's during a music concert or in a theater show,
Mm. Yeah.
there is a strong visual element involved for the purpose, partly also to put your mind in another mindset than the daily reality of things, to have that
Of course. Yeah.
altered state of reality. And I think this is something that, bands, actually through different genres, probably also try to put on
Yeah.
onto their stages, to
I mean,
have
as a
that audience in their world,
yeah, I mean,
in a
as
different
a
world.
black metal guy, I can relate to that completely. I mean, I've
Yeah,
done a variation
exactly.
on the same theme for 30 years. It's just
Yeah,
that I think what it is that it really surprised the heavy metal people and the heavy metal audience because it sort of came from nowhere for us. Even though remember being on tour with Immortal in 2000, and Einar from Wardruna was the drum tech, 20
hmm,
something years ago, and he told me about, I'm going to do this thing, Wardruna, and we were like, oh, okay. It seemed, what are you going to do? You're going to go in the mountain and make all this homemade instruments, and look where he is now. It's quite an incredible
yeah,
journey from over 20 years ago when he first told me about it. But what seems to be the driving part of the engine behind its popularity is gaming as well, because it
yeah,
so perfectly dovetails with that environment which sort of young people are immersing themselves into. I say, I don't mean you young people, old man shouts at clouds, but yeah, that young
yeah.
people are perfectly. It's sort of it's perfect for gaming, and you have a lot of sort of experience contributing music to games as well, which I also wanted to ask you about. But answer the first bit first.
Well, it's true. I mean, there is a lot of relevance to immersive experience, you could
Mm.
call it in a broader term. And games, whether it's on a tabletop role-playing game where people just talk together and make up stories,
D and D
storytelling, like
D and
all
D is
kinds.
tabletop, right? Hang on.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Or if it's modern technology, this is definitely based on this whole immersive experience.
sure.
But I think there is a difference though between a form of escapism,
Mm.
and actually trying to connect. And I think this is such a sweet point with live music concerts, where actually if you have such a live audience, there is that connection also,
Yeah,
that sort of intertwining between doing it together,
yeah. Well,
the audience
it's a
takes
form of
as much
communion or
part.
something. You can call it communion, I suppose. Sort of
Yeah, even
artistic
that.
communion or something.
Yeah, people do have that, yeah, spiritual experiences even,
Mm.
or that, yeah, that feeling of coming together, exactly. So yeah, but I guess games also, if it's if it's multiplayer, has that aspect. So
So then you were. So which came first for you then? Obviously, you said you
Hmm.
were interested in. You grew up doing this sort of. I guess they call it LARPing. Would that be correct?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, that is it. So,
it's okay. And then but
yeah.
no, it's interesting for me because maybe when I was sort of really interested in that kind of thing, and I was very interested in science fiction and fantasy when I was a teenager as well. But I didn't. There was no like. I mean, I was 16 in 1990, 1990, 91, 91. So it was before the internet and that kind of thing, and so there wasn't this other technological avenue that would have sat right beside my interests at the time, because I was quite a nerdy kid who was really just into reading books and doing many of the same kind of things. But that was all there kind of was. You
Yeah.
played tabletop games the odd time, but I sort of, when I hit 13, 14, I was less interested. I just wanted to be in a band. But
Hmm.
probably if at 12 or 13, the similar kind of technology had been there, I might have moved sideways along with that kind of stuff as well. It just seems that
Hmm.
this kind of music scene, whether it's Highling or something like these, has kind of gestated. Is that the right word? It's all been born together at the same kind of time, and I think there's also an incredible longing for people for sort of a sort of collective romantic nostalgia, and which has been sort of driven by some of the gaming. That people are sort of identifying with this middle age that we can argue about whether it did or didn't exist, but it's definitely been a driving force for that. And I think I see it as a kind of sort of, no, I'm not going to say a pan-European thing or something. That's not necessarily true, but certainly a great longing amongst people. And I see this at crowds of people who pack in to watch Heilung at a festival. We've been at the same festival
Hmm.
you watch. It seems to be a great appetite for this feeling of, I don't know if it's a lost longing or something like this, for some
Yeah.
sort of element that they want to connect with but don't know how. Does that make any sense?
It does.
Sorry,
Yeah.
lot to unpack there, but
I'm thinking, well, my mind is brought to the topic of also self-actualization, or bringing the internal to the outer world, whether that is an artist, learning an instrument
Yeah.
and creating eventually, perhaps after doing 15 years of other bands and other shows, something like a big, massive breakthrough show, whether it is like a form of self-actualization and the presentation of that to an audience. I think everyone individually, the audience as well, the people who enjoy it, also are working on that topic within themselves. They recognize something of probably themselves, or something that definitely piques their interests and touches this sensitive snare inside them, and they find connection. And that brings communion also, because part of that communion experience in the audience is that there's a lot of people there coming together that share, well, at least love for the music they're gonna see, but also probably a whole subculture around it.
Mm.
There's a lot of connecting points for all these people. And yeah, I think, well, what can I say about it? It like attracts like.
Do you think there's some element of it that is Do you
So,
think there's some element of it that is a sort of existential longing for some sort of old Europe, or some sort of connection to some, even if it's romantic or nostalgic or fantastical? It seems to
yeah.
me it seems to me to have been, all of this stuff seems to have gotten really popular at a time when people seem to be so uprooted from their past and their culture and their history, that this
Mm.
somehow seems to have become like some sort of I don't know, motif or something like this, some sort of emblematic of this sort of something lost innate that they don't really quite know how to relate to. That's sometimes because I mean, these are the things I've been singing about for 30 years. And
Yeah.
when all these bands started to play at all the metal festivals, I talked to many grumpy metalheads, and they were like, "Who the fuck is this band, and why are they playing last?" And I said, "Mate, look at them. You can't
Yeah.
put them on at 3 in the afternoon," which is, very clever.
Mm.
But also, isn't it so great that these bands are here trying to do this, than grindcore bands singing about fucking killing prostitutes or something, or some rap metal or whatever you would have been somewhere there. That there's this is something, how this somehow has some more sort of organic, natural, nature related thematic that has got to be better for us as a people, that people are relating to this. Or maybe I was
Yeah.
just being a bit too
Well,
reading things into it that aren't there. I'm not sure, but I think there was something there in that observation.
this is definitely an echo you see all across all the platforms. Is that how people relate to this music is definitely personal, or internalized even.
Echoes.
And yeah, perhaps they are. Perhaps there is a part that is seeking, this main expression that's always used, seeking your roots, wanting to
Mm,
connect to each other, to nature, to history.
yeah.
And definitely that sort of sub branches into different groups who take that with more a grain of salt, or like go actually into the extremer expressions of that internal feeling. And that is quite a sliding scale, I have to say, because if I would compare it to other rising new music genres, there was always that form of this is it. I have found it. If you speak to the hardcore fans and sub niche around a, a music genre. So I don't know if this new, let's call it nature-based music genre,
Sure.
history-based, um, is something other than another uh, new genre with fans who just very much identify with it,
Yeah.
or if it's actually a basis for something bigger.
True.
Uh,
Yeah.
some could call that even religious aspects, spiritual
Sure.
aspects.
Yeah.
There's a lot of personal attachment that I see.
Yeah.
And you could also say that a lot of the artists that are making this type of music feel that personal connection to, I want to express something here that is important to me, which often does relate back to nature or
Mm,
some aspects of history.
yeah.
But I do find it important to know that there's a difference between echoing history and being very interested in runic texts, and all this new stuff that you could probably dig yourself in really deeply, and to combine it with personal reflection. And
Mm,
I personally enjoy acts a lot that somehow twine it into personal reflection or more contemporary ideas about how we can implement knowledge from the past in the present, what is still relevant today. You heard that from
yeah.
Einar. So it's well, as many people as there are, there's quite some levels here of
Well, I think
how
it's
deep people go into it or
no,
not.
no.
But yeah.
I think it's very interesting, and I totally agree with you. And
Hmm.
I would say that it's a trend. There's no doubt about it, but it's a positive trend. You know, I mean,
Yeah,
I've seen many trends
definitely.
come and go through the festival season and all this kind of stuff. I mean, I think there is a very great want and will amongst people for what they perceive as exotic or of the other, like something
Hmm.
of the other. And you know, there's this is exemplified in this music quite perfectly. But as I said to many grumpy metalheads who were like, "Oh, who the fuck is this?" I said, "Well, isn't it great that somehow this is maybe connecting people to their culture, to their history, to their past?" Now, of course, as you say, there's a percentage of people who just love dressing up and who
Yeah,
just love for music. It's great to game to, um, and that, you know, absolutely nothing wrong with that. But there will be a percentage of people who it will be a gateway into going, well, okay, where did my family come from? Let's look into my local
yeah,
myths and legends, and that's kind of a bit where you know, the things I've been trying to sing about for 30 years, but maybe, you know, just wore the wrong outfits. I don't know, but I find it a very positive trend, even if the
yeah,
music sometimes leaves me on the shore. I'm not really into, I can't really relate to some of the world new age isms of elements of it. It's a
yeah,
bit too light for me sometimes, but I do think it's a very positive trend. And it's got to be one thing I've also, I think that's very strong about it is the sort of element of the sort of feminine power, if that's the right word, that seems to be at the head of some of this music. Because if you look back to
mm,
Celtic civilization, or if you look back through, you know, my own, you know, sort of pre-Christian history, the um, it was, you know, Celtic society was very much a matriarchal society on some level, and so something that deeply primal within that echo, as you say, which is a great word. That's one of the word I was maybe searching for, the sort of echo,
mm,
that I find really sort of interesting, fascinating, and like I said, positive about all of this kind of music. I don't know what you think of.
mm.
Do you see what do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I hear you here, and I have to say that this is very nice because you, if you dig into that old cultural way
Yeah,
and tradition, you will, of course, end up with older societies that have worked in a different form,
yeah,
matriarchies instead of patriarchies and stuff like that,
yeah,
or more tribal forms of living, and especially local resourcing,
yeah.
and there's definitely a lot to dive in. And I think this is one of the first moments I actually see people really digging into their history, which before was definitely not the most popular topic.
No.
And there's so much treasure in history because, well, we keep repeating it. Or at least human nature has that tendency to keep repeating the same type of patterns.
Mm,
And I think we can look back and see what is something that we can implement today.
mm.
Um, and also, you could say it's nice to have the effort to preserve old instrumentation, old
Oh,
melodies,
absolutely, of course, yeah,
old texts, because who else is going to dust them off? And in that
yeah.
sense, we're really speaking of quite a revolution here, because if you would have talked to anyone 15 years ago, which I did, it was very hard to find, people who could find more information for you. You really had to go through
Mm.
the archives. And so now there's such a broader way to carry this type of information. On the other hand, with so much information going on, there is always that tiny little bit of risk where people make it that much personal and internal that they sort of put their own ideas on top of it and say this is how you should view things. This is what they meant, and when people start to weaponize it or politicize it, that is a problem to me, because for me source material is just as it is, it's a neutral ground. You can learn from history, our mistakes, and also the things we did great. Um, because then, we had, for example, I'm such a fan of local resources. Yeah. We grow our pears in some country, ship it to the other side of the world to get it wrapped, and then you have it in the
Of course.
supermarket here.
I, I,
So
I mean, I think that as something gets popular, and it begins to, the sort of train begins to leave the station and get, increasingly out of control, there's nothing you can do about who decides to politicize or weaponize it. I mean, having,
yeah.
as I said, being involved in black metal for 30 years, I mean, that's the fucking, if you can learn anything from that, that's exactly where that happens, and there's really nothing you can do with that. But I mean, I'm also kind of like, let me ask you this though. Being Dutch, though, I mean, there are certain countries that are synonymous with traditional music and traditional instruments. Like, say, Irish traditional music is huge, and this is a massive thing. But Dutch traditional music, is there
Yeah.
such a thing, or am I being sort of ignorant about that? Or is that the reason why you gravitated towards,
Yeah.
Norse, the equivalent of
Yeah.
Norse mythology or musical?
Well, yeah, that's a very interesting question because I had that question before, why don't you could you not sing something in Dutch or could you look
Oh,
into it there? And I have to say, I haven't found personally source material from here in a time period that I find interesting to put into
sure.
art
Yeah,
because I need that personal relevance, but also that fascination, which I simply have not found in my own culture. But also, we as the Dutch, we kind of, we were everywhere as well
mm.
as merchants and horrible traders,
So I would
and
imagine, but
yeah,
I would imagine there are Dutch, there's medieval
yeah,
elements, that
yeah,
if that was your chosen period of history, you could find
yeah.
lots of medieval inspiration, but you're going
I
obviously
could.
much further back,
Yeah, yeah, and also I don't necessarily, I more look at it as northern Western Europe
Mm,
than typically Dutch, typically German,
yeah,
typically Old High German, Old Frisian. Of course, there's treasure there if you really want to dig into it. I know some groups that are making amazing stuff, but it's just not that personal connection that I
yeah,
have to it. As well as if I look really objectively at my career, even if I would find a great traditional melody here, I would be less inclined to duplicate it again. And I more want to really make my own texts and my own melodies.
yeah.
But I sort of look into the past and see, okay, how was it done then? What can I learn from that? What type of form of poetry writing did they use? In which meters? In what form? And then take that into the present.
Well,
But yeah,
yeah, I mean, I suppose it's similar to, I mean, I'm not sure that in Ireland there is people really know about any sort of, old Irish Celtic, sort of musical, um, instrumentation or something like this. But certainly, obviously, people want to delve into Irish traditional music. But
mm,
well, that's still a kind of rich vein to tap into that still exists in the modern day. But what you guys are kind of doing is resurrecting something that, I mean, I remember this band Headin' in Garna, which was sort of popular
yeah,
20, 25 years ago. Um,
I still listen to them. So,
yeah, that
they're
was
good.
yeah,
Mm,
that was kind of one of the first CDs I picked up where I was like, kind of, okay, what the fuck is this? Is this a kind of a Norwegian Dead Can Dance, or but it made some kind of impression. But that was the first time that I heard
yeah.
somebody try and do that kind of thing.
Yeah, it was actually happening Garna and also Garmana, the old Garmana, and yeah, this type of groups also that can dance. That for me really pushed that whole like, oh, I like this type of sounds. This has something that I can relate to. That I feel. I don't know what to call it exactly by name, but that I feel that relation with. So
But
maybe
one,
that was actually one of the influences why I looked into Scandinavian folklore as well, besides, the gaming interests.
yeah,
So, yeah.
Well,
Hmm.
one thing I'm kind of curious about is how you get involved with doing the music for games and that kind of thing. I mean,
Yeah.
I can say from being, say, involved in the Irish music industry, or rather not involved, I excluded for the last 30 years. Um, well,
Yeah.
certainly, Primordial is the biggest heavy metal band from Ireland, probably, well, whatever.
Yeah.
And there's absolutely, it's a very sort of weird, closeted, closed scene where there is no mixing
Mm.
of genres and people, and there's no real recognition of whatever, I suppose, heavy music or whatever. But nobody would say to me, "Hey, you want to do vocals for this other kind of project that's about maybe Celtic mythology or something
Yeah.
like this?"
Yeah.
Of course, let's say the trend hasn't, or the trend hasn't come round to, there isn't a series called The Celts yet on Netflix. You know
No.
what I mean?
No. Not
There's
yet.
not yet. So,
Exactly.
maybe it's my time is coming around with these things, but what I mean is, we've always felt very, very on the outside of Irish musical society, or whatever.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
maybe heavy metal thrives on that alienation, that kind of thing. But I'm sort of been doing my homework on your sort of timeline, and it seems like a very short period of time from when you started doing, like, I'd see here, folk noir is what I'm looking at. I'm not
mm.
at the same time, and I'm just sort of till you're doing then music for this Viking movie, Red Beard, I guess that is, you know.
Yeah, Red Bad. That was actually based on an old Frisian
Mm.
uh, history.
And then the next year you're doing the main theme for the Xbox game Vigor. So how did you get into, so kind
Yeah.
of, to me it seems sort of like a sort of I mean, maybe it's because I'm so alienated from that scene, or I don't really understand it exactly, in the sense that you can kind of sidestep into all of these things, and it seems to really, really neatly fit in
Yeah.
together. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, this is actually a question I don't actually objectively know the answer to myself, because for most of these projects I was emailed or called up.
Okay.
So I haven't shot out 1,000 emails like, please listen to my music, can you plug it somewhere.
Yeah.
I do have to say that I have, of course, been doing the music with the older type of instruments for quite some time,
Mm.
and that might have helped in producers looking for players that are actually having that skill set that they,
Sure.
that
Yeah,
they
yeah.
can
That,
approach.
that makes
Um,
sense.
yeah, so, and that together with social media angle or YouTube, having a video with quite some views
Yeah, yeah.
helps for people, because, well, for all I know, they're just lazy typing in the word this or that, and
True.
there you
Yeah,
go,
yeah.
you pop up.
Yeah.
But to give myself also a little bit of credit, I think, with Red Bat, for example, that was the first collaboration with Trevor Morris. He found it very fitting because I was actually Dutch, to work with a player from here that
Yeah.
also accidentally played instruments from this time period. So he had done his homework and approached me. That was a good collaboration. So when the Vikings Valhalla spin-off came around,
Yeah.
I was the first one to be called, like, oh, I have an opening for you. I'd love to have you on the team. It's a
Yeah.
team of people.
Yeah.
And so it is a little bit helpful, to have that kind of, you could say, returning offers, as well as probably colleagues who then notify your work.
Mm. Yeah.
As the saying goes, if you do one thing right, usually, hopefully, something else follows.
It's kind of like a perfect storm of things, in a sense. You've got your own talent, your own the own
Yeah.
things that you're building and making and creatively doing yourself, and then also the sort of cultural zeitgeist of whether it's Vikings on Netflix and all that kind of thing is sort of moving in a
Yeah.
parallel sort of way. So you can kind of step from one to the other, is what I seem to observe from, sort of the outside of that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, and exactly that type of jumping here and there, that I have to say is also quite a threat through what I've been doing, because I have been circling also around doing work with other music groups, and giving a tip here or there. If, oh, you're looking for a hurdy-gurdy player, I just happen to know a few. So there is that,
Yeah, yeah,
maybe that vibe, that
yeah, yeah.
oh, this this girl from the Netherlands, she knows some old players. Better ask her. And it just happened from enthusiasm, my own enthusiasm. You know,
Yeah.
there, you know how the saying goes: the things you love, your mouth spills over with. So that's what I've that's how I've behaved over the last 10, 15 years.
And that's how you
Um,
get in. That's how you got involved in doing then the soundtrack for the, as you said, the Vikings Valhalla. Then this kind of spin-off thing.
yeah, yeah, on invitation, as well as the Vigor game you mentioned,
Mm.
and some other projects that are on the still running. But yeah, it happens on invitation.
Mm.
Um, and of course, sometimes it also doesn't work out. I did the as a Assassin's Creed from Ubisoft Valhalla in the earliest days. I was consulting them, and you know, if you do actually a good consulting job, that means you also talk about all the
Yeah.
other options out there,
Yeah.
because that's first and foremost. You want to help the products forward.
I mean, and
Mm.
certainly, I think that in a music industry, which is, let's be honest, sort of the traditional methods of the music industry are pretty much dead.
Yeah,
And sometimes I look at things from my sort of old-fashioned perspective, and I realize that they're sort of, well, they're old-fashioned and they're sort of anachronistic. And the idea, I remember
mm.
talking to, I think it was the guitar player of Septic Flesh years and years ago, and he told me he was making music for computer games. And it was one of the, I mean,
Yeah,
we were on tour and he was just going, and this is 2003, maybe four. And I was like, wow,
wow,
holy fuck, okay, wow. And he was just like, mate, you have no idea. We make nothing when we will make nothing. As technology moves, as traditional heavy metal musicians, forget it. But this, this will pay properly. Because
wow,
because when what he clearly understood was that he understood and had a glimpse into technology that maybe I wasn't privy to at that moment, which was that you can't pirate a massive platform computer game. It's just impossible.
no,
So
yeah,
therefore, what computer game sales now dwarf music sales, and they certainly dwarf. And once streaming came in, where I mean, I understand it, but I'm fundamentally against the principle on some level, in the sense that the musician is the last in line, and if
mhm.
Spotify pays you 0.708 cent per stream, well, look,
Yeah, yeah,
we don't need to discuss how unridiculously unfair that is, but that's how the playing field was set because,
mhm.
musicians don't have a lobby, they don't have a
Yeah,
union, they don't have this kind of thing. And so it
yeah,
seemed to me that a lot of people kind of got left behind in understanding how the technology was moving. And they also got
mm,
kind of left behind in understanding that, like, oh, I could do what I'm doing normally and also do all these, potentially try and do some of these other things, even though I understand, like, I have a cousin who pitches on games and he pitches on movies, and he said, man, the work I used to get 10 years ago, now there's hundreds of people, all of you,
yeah, yeah.
all of you guys are now pitching on my same movies. So I don't know, does it feel like you're trying to get, how we say, a smaller piece of a bigger pie, or are you trying to get, do you find that you're inundated with offers, or you've solidified your reputation now, I guess? So I don't know.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense
Well,
what I'm saying?
yeah, it does make sense. It's yeah, it's gosh, it's that super cheesy saying. It's really how you look at it. Is the glass half full or is it half empty? You know, you got to look at the things you have achieved and learned from as well, and be grateful for those experiences, because that in the end is what you need to keep doing this type of shit for so long, exactly with like how many cents per stream, you know, nothing.
Yeah.
So it's important to have a strong internal drive and to have that sense of I'm doing this because I enjoy doing it, and this is how I enjoy life, and it has probably even some greater meaning,
Yeah, definitely.
at least for myself personally, to express myself and have that self-actualization through it. But on the other hand, of course, there is always a competitive element. You cannot deny it, but look at how many people are on the world. You know, there will always be people who are similar to what you're doing, but you can only have control about how you stand in the world, in your corner of the world, and do the best job you can. I truly believe that, because if we focus on our losses, we lose our drives. So yeah, it's important to yeah put your arrow, your compass straight for that,
This is true.
especially yeah.
I mean, I will say I've been a glass half empty man since the day I was born, most probably. But no, I agree with you completely. You make your own luck, so to speak. The what you give out, you get back in, so to speak. But what I'm kind of fascinated by is what I'm trying to get at is how you can have a cultural zeitgeist and a sort of perfect storm of things
Mm.
that go together at being at the sort of inception of a scene like that it appears to me that you're part of, and as somebody who's from a different scene that arguably maybe had its peak 25 years ago, um, technologically, an awful lot of people and musicians sort of feel a bit left out in the cold from that.
Mm.
And it's some of it is by ignorance, some of it's by just stubbornness, some of it's by just no fault of their own, other than that the industry and the technology kind of passed them by. But
Yeah.
what you're doing, when I look at your through your career, and when I was doing my homework and looking at your listening to your music and all this kind of stuff, I went, all right, okay, so you've come to sort of it seems for the scene a perfect combination of the kind of the aesthetic, the videos, the music, but also involving it in the side of technology and gaming and stuff that all seems to kind of make sense in a way
Yeah.
that I suppose for more traditional people, they're not the avenues they would have really thought of, or maybe if they weren't even open to them. So you know what I mean? And I just find that I'm just kind of interested in
Yeah.
the idea, like, do you consider yourself to have been at the sort of inception of a scene? Do you know what I mean? Like that's it's an
Yeah.
interesting kind of concept to know. In
Yeah.
hindsight, do you go, oh, I was one of the first of that kind of thing, and therefore you kind of reap the rewards of that? Does that make, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think this is your conclusion. I think it's okay to say yes to that. Yeah, I was one of the earlier ones, and of course, it's also important to a certain point, um, protect your work by sticking to your own originality. But well, it is what you could say a trend right now. If I think about other genres that may have come earlier, it's also a matter of how much is a certain type of musical expression suited for other platforms. Objectively speaking, if you
Yeah,
have a lot more ambient sound, there will be a higher chance it fits to a cinematic cue
exactly.
than if it's a power song, that
But this,
has a
but
lot of guitars and vocals, especially
exactly.
vocals, which I love, by the way, because that's like the soul of the song. But vocals are a directive. So for a cue or for a video game, then you really need to find the right match or the right type of music, or
That's
maybe the perfect road trip movie about this type of music. And if it's not there, create it.
this is very interesting because this comes back to the very first thing that we talked about, which is the movement from an aural to an optical world, in a sense
Yeah.
that this is sometimes what I when I watch, I keep picking the name Heilung. There's a few other ones that are on my tip of my tongue, but when I watch it and hear it, it makes sense. When I close my
Mm.
eyes, it makes less sense to me as a heavy metal musician, so to speak.
Mm.
But
Okay.
of course, for people who are gaming and listening, it makes
Hmm.
or pick another band where the music is more cinematic and sort of
Yeah.
aural, and that's because I suppose fundamentally what this music is it is a more it suits the more sort of optical modern world. And as you
Mm.
say, if you're gaming and you have music which is interrupting the brain
Yeah.
the sort of cognitive relationship with the game, which is full
Exactly. Yeah.
of beats and words, your gut's
Yes.
going to distract you. So in a
Yes.
sense, again, it comes back to
Yeah.
well, to me, it comes back to it being an optical world, but also to the perfect storm of the cultural zeitgeist, which is
Yeah.
you just happen this happenstance music fits perfectly into this
Yeah.
um,
But you know,
gaming
for
world.
the people who came earlier, of which some of them actually also now tour worldwide, but they were there probably a little bit earlier with their little toggle harpa on some mountain, and they would probably be there 20 years after, you know, when people had you know, really had enough of it. They will still sit there with
Sure,
their
of
little
course.
harp.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So
Yeah, exactly.
it's definitely a point in time. One of my most favorite debates among a few colleagues is, have we picked yet? You know, is this it? But there seems to be more and more and more coming, and I also sense it's branching out through more general ethnic alternative
Yeah,
fantasy type of products,
yeah,
or if we're talking about film or
yeah, yeah.
TV shows.
I think.
But sorry, but hopefully for you, maybe there's also going to be other branches. For example, that fantastic show that I really want to see about the Celts on History Channel.
Why hasn't there been? I mean, the Celtic. If you take Irish, folkloric legends, whether it's, I don't know, Deirdre and the Sons of Uisnech, and like our mythology, our Celtic mythology is built for,
Yeah,
it's ready made for an
yeah,
exact kind of similar series to Vikings, for example, and the Celts. I don't
definitely.
know. Maybe the Celts are, they're not as romantic a proposition. I don't know. I can't believe that they aren't. I don't see
You
any
know,
reason why there shouldn't be.
yeah, I had to, maybe this is too specific, but I'm thinking immediately about the fact that I had the same thought as you. Why hasn't there been yet? When
Yeah.
I was watching this fantastic show written by Neil Gaiman called American Gods. And there's one episode where they actually do a backstory about an old Gaelic myth,
Yeah.
and that whole episode, you know, could have been the start of a whole new series because it had all those points that we have in
Yeah.
the zeitgeist today,
Yeah.
the aesthetics that we love, the coloring even
Yeah. Yeah.
of you know.
Yeah.
So well, I would say there's a market for it.
Yeah.
Maybe this conversation will spin something off eventually.
I'm also, maybe, I know, it just fascinates me. It's like, and I'm not complaining or anything about it. It's just an observation. It's like, well, that's unusual why that hasn't happened, because
Yeah.
there is a rich tapestry of folklore to dive into. I also think one of the things that is really fascinating about the kind of, what would you call this scene, this sort of new folk, or new, what should we call it for the purposes of this conversation? Uh,
Ah,
we can't call it new
yeah.
romantic folk, or somebody would get it.
Yeah.
But it's one thing I find is, I do recognize is that a friend of mine saw some of these bands at a festival, and her first comment was like, "Oh, they look like the people from the games,"
Mm,
and I was like,
mm,
"Yeah, you're perfectly right." And
yeah.
this is the sort of cognitive, sort of connecting. It's like, oh, because
Definitely.
people who've played Assassin's Creed, or who've played, I'm not good with names of games, but games where the characters do now look like the people on the stage,
Definitely.
um,
Yeah,
is
it's happening
almost,
more.
it's
Mm.
perfect. Like when I look at, as I said, Heilung or whatever, I go, oh, I see how I can prod. To me, I can plot the connection between, okay, whether he's, as you say, the Lord of the Rings, sort of middle alter instigator, and plot it along and
Mm.
go, okay, so a majority of people have played a game with characters that are resonant on some
Yeah,
level with how this looks on the
yeah,
stage. Of course, it looks amazing on the stage anyway, but
yeah. But I have to add. Sorry to interrupt you, but I have to
oh,
add something here because this has been brewing and boiling for a long time prior to this peak, and I
mm,
think you had to. If you look at it now, it's easier to recognize. I mean, we've seen it also in metal music. There has been this implementation of culture, Nordic culture and mythology in artwork, in graphics, also in
sure,
stage styling and lyrics. There's these groups, I'm thinking like Amon Amarth, if I say this correct, or Tur,
yeah,
or Elevati from Switzerland. They
of course,
actually
yeah,
look back to their
yeah,
Swiss Celtic roots because
yeah.
there was a Celtic tribe living there
Latin,
once.
Latin Celts, yeah. Well, I mean, this is
Yeah,
what pagan metal is, and this is what pagan metal was.
yeah,
sort of has been for all the years. I think pagan metal sort of went off the boil a little bit, maybe 10 years ago. And it feels like
Yeah.
some of the stuff that's happening now took its place a little bit. And I think it's maybe because it didn't get to branch out into some of those other places
Yeah.
necessarily. But yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's what I was trying to sort of it's more the sort of subconscious thing, the optical
Mm.
subconscious, in the sense that people see that and they go, oh, this all the kind of melding of those different worlds, where somebody goes, well, they look like characters,
Mm.
but they look, it's sort of, what would you call it? Not symmetry. It's not the right word. Synthesis.
Yeah.
Synthesis.
It is a synthesis. Yeah, that's a great word. And definitely, there's also some synergy there. And I
Yep.
think maybe it also has to do with the fact what is the basis of these types of expression in other media, in whether it's old books and stories like
Mm.
Tolkien, who of course look back at Nordic mythology, but all these fantasy shows as well. They sort of reach back into archetypical expressions, old forms, as well as that medieval look, but also that romanticism, a little bit about the past. There's something more going on here, I think, even besides the music and the
Yeah.
music genre that is now
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
big. It is in general that all these types of media are, and especially if we look at the period before the peak,
Yeah.
we're already connecting to
Yeah. Yeah.
something. Mythology, folklore
Yeah.
has that capability to sort of carry these larger senses of self in ourselves. We find the hero in there, we find
Yeah.
the knight, even shapes like dragons or
Yeah.
monsters, the
It's got.
monsters in
No,
ourselves.
I think you're
Yeah.
I think you're definitely entirely right, and it comes back to a little bit what we just talked about, maybe the second thing in,
Yeah.
which was that, is this some sort of animistic, sort of preternatural, maybe that's the right word, I'm not sure, atavistic maybe, longing for some sort
Yeah.
of thing that we see that is lost in our modern culture, because our modern culture is so swamped with
Yeah.
just sort of vulgar materialism and that kind of thing. And so, in a sense, um, this kind of music is speaking to something that we somehow know
Mhm.
innately is lost, and maybe, I mean, I certainly see it as lost, and maybe some people hadn't thought about it
Yeah.
before, so it's awoken
Yeah.
some sort of thing within them.
Well, yeah. I cannot speak for others, but for me that is the case. I mean, it is also, whether it is music or anything else I do, there is that, you use the word animism, which is the perfect term. That idea of having that spirited collective going on around us, that of course has these deeper roots also, and probably, if it works through us, also has archetypical expression.
Mm.
So there's definitely a bridge between the inner world, you could say, and the outer world. And I think what this art form also tries to do is to work with that material, to actually, if I make it really big, to have those spirits or ancestors
Mm.
have
Yeah.
their messages come through us, because
Yeah.
we are all just an extension of the same
Yeah.
energy.
Yeah.
I'm looking not at individualism here, but actually just like we're just, as the moment we're breathing, we're just like little flowers living for a day, right? And then we collapse back
Yeah.
and we're back in the earth. And it's this endless cycle.
Yeah.
And the way we express ourselves, especially with these folkloric elements, there seems to be that cyclical element as well.
Well, it's certainly, I mean, it's certainly the thing that attracted me to when we started Primordial in '91. We weren't really interested in singing songs about Satanism, essentially. I mean, there were some elements of biblical myth that we incorporated, or the idea of sort of Lucifer as adversary, or whatever you want to call it. But fundamentally, we were more interested in, I suppose, the sort of shamanistic pagan elements of sort of. mm, I didn't really quite know how to uncover them yet, but the sort of
Yeah.
pre-Christian society, whether it was Celtic, but even though we weren't really a Celtic metal band, but we had elements of that sort of
Mm.
dark, the dark
yeah,
underbelly of that sort of fundament.
yeah,
And I think that there's always been an element of metal, especially pagan metal, what you want to call it, has tried to connect in the same way. And maybe that's why some of this music aesthetically sort of resonates with me in a way that even if I don't resonate necessarily with the sound of it, sometimes
mm,
I think it's a very um, strong force for positive good in a
yeah,
sense, culturally,
mm,
mythologically, historically,
yeah,
because
yeah,
it's doing the same, a similar thing to to what we tried to have been trying to do, but our let's say avenue always took us maybe to the darker side of
yeah,
the woods or human
yeah.
nature, so to speak.
Our
And
yeah,
sometimes this moves in a way that I think is it has a broader
mm,
church. Could that
yeah. Well, nature is, of
pun
course,
intended?
has no good or evil. The one could call it almost the ultimate neutral. There's just impulse, drive, and there's definitely also collective energy,
Yeah.
or in my opinion. And these teams, dark, light, good, evil. I don't think in these types of terminology.
Well,
These kind of borders, these borders are human made.
sure. Well,
That's not how nature operates.
Well, sure.
So
What I mean by what I was trying to say is that, in a sense,
yeah,
our prism through which to navigate through this was black metal, which
yeah,
inherently
yeah,
has a form of negativity, fundamentally, or
mm,
esoteric, sort of, what shall we call it, nefarious, or not nefarious is not the right word, a sort of fundamentally dark view of the world that goes hand in
yes,
hand with it, that I sometimes I see when I see with this music it has something very different that I think has a broader church of
yeah,
appeal, which
yeah,
is not quite so exclusionary. Does that make any
yeah.
sense?
Oh, it does. Of course, yeah.
That's
But
not to say that the things we're
yeah,
singing about were binary choices of good and evil. Um,
yeah, exactly. But
you know,
I would I would say there's this there is something they have in common though, because as you said, um, it's not about these shapes. One is this and the other is that, but they do both share that drive of working with something other than daily reality. It does tap into a layer of existence that talks about our deepest impulses, drives, emotions, and it expresses that, well, in a raw form. And shamanism and shamanistic music is also quite a raw form, as well as metal. But I think there they might,
mm.
reach commonality, because
I
there's something of our instincts
yeah,
that is
there's a
being called
primacy.
upon.
There's a
Yeah,
primacy to it, yeah. Definitely,
exactly.
I'd agree with that. I suppose I'm just thinking of how it's interpreted in the broader sense,
Yeah,
i.e.,
yeah.
tell me this though. The instruments that you're playing, I mean, are you making them? Or like,
No,
how is there somewhere you can go where you can just buy these instruments, or how does that work? Sorry to just completely
uh,
you know.
yeah. Well, apart from okay, there's a few instruments I do make. I have to correct myself, but this is just because they are, for example, conscious shells, and then I make them into blowing horns
Okay,
by taking the tip off and
a
making some
conch.
measurements.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And also, I wanted to be part of the building of my Graviklira by instrument builder Sverre Heimdal in Norway. I asked him if I could be there because I wanted to have that personal involvement and of carving it out, stringing it up, just to have that. Yeah, that's also maybe an animistic form
Mm.
of creating an instrument to really work through it, as far as I could do that. When it comes to my skin drums or nickel harpa, mono harpa, I went through other specialists. My drum is made by someone that has a very long history of drum making and doing that with respect for the animal
Mm.
and the life of the animal as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a mishmash of finding the right people or trying to work with it as much as I can. And then when it comes to the playing of it, I think this is where I try to make the connection to um, the molecules, to the matter, to infuse it by playing it. I
Mm,
actually name my instruments. I'm not sharing those names, but they all have a name.
that's
So
okay. That's okay.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
I think we all do that. My bass even behind me might have a
exactly.
name as well, but I
Yeah,
won't
it's
divulge
almost,
that.
yeah, it's what do they call it? Anthropomorphic. It's something
Anthropomorphic,
becomes,
yes.
yeah, it becomes something more
Mm.
if you don't let it die by not playing
And
it. So,
your yeah, exactly. And your process is then, I mean, are you just doing it like on a home studio and you just start and you just work on a, like as you would say, a riff or an idea, and then you just sort of build on
yeah.
that, or what?
It's different per song. I usually start from poetry
Okay.
because text is important to me. Text for me is the carrier of what I want to carry through the song,
Mm.
and the melody. Sometimes it starts with the melody, but these are rare occasions for me. And I have understood a lot of other people work the other way around. But I need that poetry as the first and foremost expression, and then I will see which parts of the poetry I keep actually onto the final music piece, because sometimes pieces are written a lot longer, but I maybe use only a few sentences in the final music. But I know it's part of a
Sure.
bigger text, right?
Yeah, I understand
So
that because I mean, as a
yeah.
writing lyrics myself, very often, sometimes
Hmm.
I would write a lyric and then maybe I would sort of mathematically go, okay, well, you've got to put this bits around the words, essentially, you know.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's the inner part of me that isn't really a musician, sort of going, all right, we'll
Yeah.
start with the words first and then sort of move
Yeah.
things around it, you know. So
Totally.
what's your next thing that you're going to do then?
Well, I'm still working on my album. It's gaining in speed now. That's that's what I can say about it.
Okay.
When you're booking studios for final mixing and mastering, you're getting there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this is the key thing I'm doing. And next to that, I'm of course doing some of these projects that we discussed already, where someone approaches you for a project
Sure.
for cinema, whatever, and you work out what they need and if I can provide it to them. So
And what
yeah, these two things.
And what
Mm,
about standing on a stage somewhere? Is this something that
yeah,
you found that you missed during the pandemic, or have you done it since the pandemic is over?
I haven't done it for years.
No?
No, I haven't stand on a stage for years, and there's practical reasons for it, but also I really want to do it only again when I can deliver a totally new products, meaning a full new album. Because this is, if I look back at my last solo album, it almost is made by another person. I have changed a lot myself, and that also comes through in how my music sounds today.
Okay.
So to actually step on the stage again, I would want to do a proper production, fully new production, and fully new band.
So you don't want to do the greatest hits, you just want to do the new stuff. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And I had to figure that out because it was actually during the pandemic where I did have a rehearsal with some people, and I couldn't play the old songs anymore with a good feeling because they were done. They had that's maybe not how the audience sees it,
Mm.
but for that part of my life they were done. I have performed them many times, but there's also a time where you have to move on and say, okay, uh, new material, new production. But I cannot tell anyone when, and that makes me a little sad. I'm not afraid to share that because sometimes I get these wonderful offers and I just hold them off because only when the time is right I'll do it again on stage. Yeah.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. I mean,
Hmm.
as someone who always, toured and always played, the pandemic was a sort of interminable
Yeah,
um, two
I
years.
heard that. Yeah, from people. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's
Well,
almost like how you do sports, right? Or it's that personal habit.
it's a
It's
release of uh,
Yeah,
that release
definitely.
of
Yeah,
energy, and I mean, also there's things that people don't necessarily want to talk to about it, talk
Mm.
about with it. I mean, of course, agency, but there was also an
Hmm.
element of, I suppose, inherent powerlessness about not
Yeah.
having that the
Yeah.
thing of being on stage that people who maybe haven't been on stage don't really recognize. But maybe it's, I'm not sure if it's a masculine, feminine thing. I'm not really too sure. I haven't analyzed it in great detail. Maybe it's just a me thing. I don't know,
Yeah.
or things like me. But I found the what you've done is you've kind of lost your superpower in a way,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and you
Well, yeah, exactly.
to be surreptitious about it, you know.
Oh,
And so
I do understand.
that's kind of
Yeah.
how I explain it to somebody who would be outside of what that
Yeah.
meant. And
Yeah.
so that you had no sense of, well, you had no sense of power anymore.
Yeah.
That's an important sort of aphrodisiac to
Mm.
to your creative element, or you whether it is to
Yeah.
elements of your ego or whatever, that kind of thing, I suppose. And so the idea
Well,
that like, oh, we just stay inside now, okay. As a person who needs to
well,
keep moving and keep on.
there's actually a lot of what you're saying. There's a lot of what you're saying and mentioning, and I think all of these aspects, in various degrees per person, probably are a part of it. And there is that. You don't just stand on the stage for nothing. You've worked towards that, and
Mm,
you have something to share. You have, especially singing, the
yeah,
act of singing. For me, it's like it's your soul.
yeah.
It's like, there's so much going on.
Mm,
So to miss doing that, almost a vocation,
yeah,
in life, or
exactly. Yeah,
that to miss that
yeah,
aspect of life, and probably also a little bit of what you're supposed to do.
yeah.
Of
It's the
course,
only
that
time.
it's
It's the only time where
draining.
you, to me, it's the only time where you really make
Yeah.
sense. But also the
Yeah.
idea, personally, like if all of it never came back, I probably wouldn't make any more heavy metal. To me,
Yeah.
there wouldn't be any point. I'd have to
Yeah.
do some other kind of music because the heavy metal
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense in any other way,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's very much connected to the live performing aspect, for sure. Yeah, I think, well, maybe then I'm lucky that I can sort of mediate between it. But
But
of
that's
course,
yeah,
yeah.
that's what I've been sort of interested in about having the, the sort of
Mm.
different levels of that kind of thing, you know. I mean,
Hmm.
um, that's
Yeah.
I find it sort of fascinating, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, me too.
Well, well, I mean,
Yeah.
genuinely, I mean, coming to the end of this now, but genuinely, as it's really kind of what well, more so what I find fascinating is the idea that here's a kind of music that I have a sort of innate respect as somebody who's interested in culture and history, mythology, sort of just say paganism, whatever that may, how we interpreted
Mm.
that, but our relationship to our past and that kind of thing, where the
Yeah.
music kind of left me a bit on the shore, so to speak,
Yeah.
ish, but that I like I said, I just see it as this sort of um, movement for sort of good within society as in a cultural sort of sense. You know what I mean? And so therefore it
Yeah.
overrides my natural cynicism. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like
Hmm.
there's a very great overriding button. It's like it just might somebody who's went no, just
Yeah.
this stuff can go on by, because I think it's got a sort of very positive energy for people to try and connect with. And if it, as we say, makes a
Yeah.
percentage of people resonate or with their past, then that has
Yeah.
to be a good thing. So you must see it.
Yeah.
I mean, do you see yourself as a sort of agent for positive good in society then? To end on.
Oh, well, I'm definitely not that agent, I would say. But I can definitely sometimes open my mouth about what I think, people should be mindful of.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah,
I meant good in a sort of subjective
yeah,
sense, but
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I'm just, I think all we can be, and I think this is what is the most important we can be, is truly ourselves. Whether that is a cynic, stoic,
skeptic.
existentialism a little bit, and to actually talk about that, I find that incredibly refreshing. So for me, what is most important for myself and the people I meet in the world is to just stop the masks. I don't mean the COVID masks, but I mean just be your authentic self, and hopefully that creates better communication, and also to accept each other being, sometimes different, a different of opinion. That makes it interesting. It's
Yeah.
terrible if we all agree all the time.
I, I agree. Well, I mean, diversity, if you want diversity, then you also want diversity of opinion, I guess, which it
Yeah.
seems the people who talk most about diversity don't want diversity of opinion. But I
Yeah.
managed to go a whole episode without discussing,
Yeah.
uh, you know, well, cancel culture and free speech and all that kind of thing. But I think that's a really good place to leave it with that last statement that you
Yeah.
made. So I'll press
Sure.
the